Welcome to The Future of Things, a podcast powered by Blue Byte. I'm your host, Amanda Costco. Thanks so much for joining. Blockchain has been getting a lot of buzz lately, and not just in financial services. Whether you're talking about NFT artwork selling for millions or Elon Musk championing Dogecoin, it seems the future of commerce, ownership, access, and exchange hinge on what will happen with blockchain technology in the coming years. But what does blockchain mean for business, and how can companies leverage it to their advantage? Here to take us through the future of blockchain technology beyond the buzz is Jason Rockwood, the VP and General Manager of VeChain. Also in this episode, you'll hear from Alex Kim, Director of Partnerships at Blue Byte. So Jason, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you, Amanda. Thanks for having me.
So you've had quite a varied background. Tell me about how your career brought you to VeChain and what you do there.
Sure thing. Yeah, I first got exposed to Bitcoin way back in 2010 while I was finishing my master's degree at MIT in media studies. And I think had I not been at MIT, I wouldn't have been traveling in the right circles to have gotten exposed to blockchain so early on. I actually bought my first Bitcoin at $10, but after going through after going through the Mt. Gox debacle, where I nearly lost everything I had invested, and it took me almost a year to get my coins back. When I came out of that, I was like, oh my God, this is not for me. I don't have the stomach for it, and sold everything off. So unfortunately, I didn't end up making millions of dollars off of Bitcoin in the early days, but it put me on the right path to where I'm headed now. I actually ended up working in digital advertising after I graduated, and then I worked for the Miami Heat as their head of innovation. So I learned a lot about corporate IT, and that in turn got me thinking about blockchain in a corporate context, which is what led me to VeChain. And what I do for VeChain is I'm the general manager for North and South America. I'm in charge of all the commercial relationships and helping companies understand how our technology can be useful and help them get onboarded. And so I'm really pulling on a variety of skills from IT to marketing, sales, et cetera. So it's been a really interesting journey to get here, but one that I feel uniquely qualified for. Yeah, so it's been a cool journey.
Fantastic. Thank you for breaking that down for us. So when people think of the blockchain today, they immediately think of the things that are the most hyped, like cryptocurrency and NFTs. But blockchain actually goes far beyond these examples. Can you break down the blockchain for us?
Sure. Yeah. How much time do you have?
Make it accessible, make it accessible for the folks at home.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll do my best to talk about blockchain in a way that I think it's approachable and understandable. I think that if you want to understand blockchain, a good place to start is thinking about the big problem that Satoshi was trying to solve with this invention. So blockchain is fundamentally a ledger, and ledgers are where humanity stores their economic activity. This has gone on since the beginning of time. But because humans don't actually trust one another, we have to use banks and lawyers and governments to monitor that activity and serve as an intermediary. So for example, we pay credit card companies huge fees to process payments. We do this because we need that third party to oversee the transaction and make sure that everything stays safe. Governments issue currencies, databases, even databases in the technical space, they rely on central administrators or auditors. This is because if they don't have that third party overseer, humans are likely to try and take advantage of one another. The problem in the end is that these intermediaries are also prone to taking advantage of their position as a trusted third party. And so, you've seen this with banks or credit card fees charging too much money, right? So Satoshi created Bitcoin and by extension blockchain in part to create a method of economic activity that didn't require a third party.
Okay, so blockchain was created to get rid of these reliance on third parties, but what exactly is it?
Yeah, so I would define blockchain loosely as a type of decentralized, immutable ledger, right? So we talked about the ledger part. Decentralized, immutable ledger. It's decentralized because no single person or entity is responsible for the ledger's accuracy. With blockchain, copies of the ledger are shared among multiple actors, and the accuracy of the ledger is achieved through something called consensus. This means that everyone has to agree on the contents of the ledger before any future entries can advance. And this means that no single party is in charge. Now, because of this decentralization, it eliminates the risk of fraud and therefore eliminates the need for a third-party overseer. With the word immutable, immutability means it can't be changed. Once an entry has been made to a blockchain, that entry is permanent. This makes blockchain a very secure technology and impossible to manipulate. You can't fudge the books. Immutability, by the way, is created by tying ledger entries to one another using cryptography. So that's where that term blockchain comes from. It's literally taking ledger entries, using cryptography to link them together so you can't manipulate one entry without manipulating the entire chain. This makes it basically impossible and thus very secure. We've already talked about the idea of a ledger, so you have a decentralized immutable ledger. Now, it's useful to keep in mind that ledgers, cryptography, and decentralization all existed separately before Satoshi, but it was Satoshi that took these different elements and combined them in a unique way to eliminate this third party. And this is his stunning achievement that has really made blockchain a game-changing infrastructure for value transfer.
Wow.
Okay.
I just want to take 1 second, just there's some really big words there that Jason talked about. Trustless, immutable. For me, having something that doesn't have to go through a clearinghouse, oh my goodness, and it's non-custodial. Decentralized, what does decentralized even mean right now in the world of the cloud, right? And the API. Jason, I feel like Satoshi, whoever he is, whoever they are, they need a Nobel Peace Prize now.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it truly is. He solved a problem that's haunted economic activity for 2,000 years. And a lot of people were working on trying to come up with a solution, but Satoshi's unique contribution was solving this challenge of the intermediary. And they also call it, if you Google, the Byzantine generals problem. Comes back to this idea of, like, if you're out in the battlefield and you've got multiple generals and you're trying to get a message to all the generals, how do you do it in a way without corrupting the message along the way so that everyone is synced up in terms of how they attack? So it's an old problem, and he came up with a really novel way of solving it.
Brilliant stuff.
So now that we're starting to understand more about what the blockchain is and how it works, how does it actually get implemented by businesses and society?
Yeah, well, you actually mentioned two of the most popular use cases already, which is cryptocurrency and NFTs. So let's actually just start there and kind of talk about what those are. Once you have a secure, immutable way of recording value, you essentially can just start printing your own money, which in this case, we're going to call cryptocurrency. You can record in the ledger that there's a certain amount of tokens that exist in an account, and then you can record the movement of those tokens from the original account to the other accounts as they move around. And using a blockchain explorer, you can literally follow every transaction that has ever occurred on a blockchain all the way back to the Genesis block. Might take you a while, but you could do it. You're able to issue money or cryptocurrencies because you can trust the ledger, right? Like, it all comes back to, if I say that there's 10 coins in this account and I give one to Alex, because it's completely trustworthy, Alex gets a coin, and like, we can all trust in that. And so it's pretty crazy. So blockchains have been a way to actually create money out of thin air. And these cryptocurrencies can be used for payment and settlement. So crypto then really is digital gold. I should mention that cryptocurrencies are in contrast to NFTs. NFT stands for non-fungible token. Crypto is considered a fungible token, which means that a fungible token means that one token is as good as any other. So in my example of giving Alex a coin, Alex doesn't care which coin I give him. And if it's a fungible token, I can give him one Bitcoin or another Bitcoin, and it really doesn't matter. When you go to the grocery store, you pay in $1. Every dollar is the same as any other dollar, so it's essentially fungible. And because of this fungibility and the ability to print money out of thin air, crypto is sort of seen as a threat to central governments that issue money. And I think that's why a lot of governments are looking into central bank-backed digital currencies, because through blockchain technology, you can migrate from physical money over to digital money. And digital money is greener, and it's more efficient, and it's faster, and it's more reliable and secure, and it's traceable. So there's a lot of advantages of digital money. And so I think that cryptocurrency as a whole is really reinventing money, and that makes it the first big use case. And then, of course, the second one, from fungible tokens, we can talk about non-fungible tokens. Non-fungible tokens are tokens that are unique. These are uniquely issued tokens that can be associated either with digital content or physical objects. And this merger of the physical world or digital ownership and the NFT, I think that's really what is exciting. It's all about tracking items, either digital or physical, and then the ownership and transfer of those items. So I think that we're going to see NFTs disrupting everything from event ticketing to art and collectibles to real estate titles. I think that NFTs are going to make the value transfer of goods, both digital and physical, more efficient and effective. I mean, if you look at most economic activity, right, it's buying stuff and then owning stuff and then selling stuff. And cryptocurrency is about paying for things, but I think that NFTs are about owning those things and transferring those things. And so crypto and NFT, like, they're getting a lot of hype right now, but I think it's justified. Alex, I mean, what's your take on NFTs? You guys are doing some stuff with that.
Yeah, I mean, again, we could probably talk about this for a few hours, but I'll just bring up one example that I wanted to highlight. In the art world, as you mentioned, NFTs are fantastic because it really appeals to collectors, right? And that's an intrinsic sort of human, very compelling piece of human nature that all of us are sort of built with. There was a street OG, sneaker OG, Jeff Staple, who we worked with a couple of years back. And he's always on the sort of bleeding edge of how can I entertain my audience with the coolest product from my brand and bring it to you. And he did a collaboration with a very cool company called Artifact, RTFKT. I believe their motto is "We're born in the metaverse," which is kind of cool. But Jeff Staple's notorious in making collaborative products with many brands. And with Artifact, they created a meta pigeon, which the New York City pigeon, is very near and dear to him. That's where you guys sort of claim to fame with the Nike SB Dunk and the pigeon motif. They created essentially an NFT of this meta pigeon sneaker. And what was really super cool about it is inadvertently, it was also a great measure for pre-sale, right? You put out this NFT, it's minted, it's limited edition. Let's say only 100 people in this case were able to get that NFT. Once they received that NFT, they actually went into production with the real shoe and they were delivered the real sneaker, these super fans. And the experimentation in the field right now is just explosive. It's so cool right now.
You're saying, actually, Alex, that they actually used NFTs to they sold the NFT to pre-sell the physical sneaker, and then they gave the sneakers to the NFT owners after the fact.
Exactly. And I don't know if they probably realized what they were doing, but it's a fantastic tool for gauging the audience too for pre-sale, right? Because one of the biggest choke points in manufacturing in general is you have to go with these factory minimums, and those that you can't sell immediately, they always go to the Marshalls and the TJ Maxx's of the world, right? A lot of inefficiencies. Great for TJ Maxx, not so great for the brand. And so all the different sort of ways that people are experimenting in this field is just mind-blowing right now.
It's an exciting area, but to push back on some of the hype a little bit, we were being told that we were moving away from owning things with companies like Uber and Airbnb, and now all of a sudden an NFT is all about owning the thing. So how do you explain that sort of reversion back to needing to own something, if only digitally?
Well, I think one thing that's interesting is just that I think that NFTs are making ownership more efficient to transfer. Right. So when I say ownership in the case of, I think what Alex and I are talking about with these NFT examples, it's not necessarily ownership in a traditional way. Let's call it authorization or access. With NFT, you have a really efficient way of transferring access, like almost like velvet rope getting into a club, right? So we often talk about NFTs enabling or authorizing experiences, like getting into pre-sale for a sneaker drop or getting access to backstage at a concert or something like that. So I think that it's a great question. And I think if you take this ownership transferability and apply it to the this new model of ownership. It's really, I think they complement each other well because NFTs are making ownership transfer more efficient, right? So it's like with Turo and the car rental right now, like you've got one car that's being moved around from person to person, or Airbnb, the way that we authenticate users accessing a home by pushing in a code. I could really see a time when an NFT will be issued to someone on their smartphone wallet and that token will actually give them access to a car or a home or something like that. And then when that token is revoked, then right out, I mean, what do you think, Alex?
It's so cool, man. I'm just beaming. Obviously, there's no video here, but I am beaming because, yeah, I'm hearing of all these stories. You know, perfect example is, to your point, it's great for passing on authorization. And one way I've seen, some people do it, especially within the art world, is to prove that and validate that you do have this NFT work of art with a certain company and with a certain allegiance, with a certain audience. On Discord, some of these companies will validate that transaction, right? And I think you're going to talk about this, where you can, when you write something to the block, it's forever, right? It's immutable. And so that's how some of these companies are validating that, oh yes, this person belongs in our community. We validated it because there's a block on their Ethereum chain that says that they did indeed, purchase this NFT that we minted together. And so once that's validated, I heard that, they're unlocking features for these select users, whether it's VIP treatment, early access to drops. I don't know, man. It's just awesome stuff.
I think it's going to be a real game changer. I mean, I think that the hype is definitely well deserved.
What about inflation? You described it as printing money. How are we not inflating blockchain with a currency that doesn't exactly exist?
Yeah, that's a very complex question. I think that one of the fun things about getting immersed in the blockchain space and going down the rabbit hole is just the way that blockchain brings together such an interesting confluence of history, technology, sociology, and economics and business. And I think that there are some really interesting questions around monetary theory and blockchain and crypto. One of the things that is interesting about Bitcoin in particular that made it such an appealing investment is because it's deflationary. So there's a fixed supply, much like the limited supply of gold that was used historically to serve as a balance to give weight and value to paper money. And then once we decoupled from the gold standard, then inflation started to really kick in, right? So with Bitcoin, you don't have inflation, you have deflation. The price of goods as priced in Bitcoin will always go down as the price of Bitcoin goes up. And so this makes it a very interesting hedge against inflationary forms of currency like the US dollar or other central bank currencies. And it could very well be. So the issue of being inflationary or deflationary, blockchain doesn't care. You can issue inflationary currencies and you can issue deflationary currencies. So for example, with VeChain, the VeChain Thor blockchain, we have two currencies. We have a kind of core ownership token called VET that is a limited supply and therefore in theory deflationary. The price is, essentially it's something that's designed to appreciate over time because of the limited supply. Whereas our gas token is more of an inflationary currency in the sense that the supply isn't fixed. And so between these two different tokens, we can design an economic framework that works best for the success of the network. So I think that what's cool about blockchain is you can pull lots of different levers to achieve the economic outcome that you desire. I'm not the one to pull those levers, and certainly, but I think that governments know those levers exist, and that's why they're getting into CBDCs, is because they see that there are different levels of control in that inflation and deflation areas. I mean, that's what central banks do, right?
So you talk a lot about trusted ecosystems between consumers and brands. Can you explain what you mean by this, and how does this become valuable for both brands and consumers?
Yeah, well, I think that in order to understand the way that blockchain creates a trusted ecosystem, you have to look at one of the core value propositions beyond crypto and NFT, right? So far we've talked about there's cryptocurrencies, which is fungible tokens, and NFTs, which are non-fungible tokens. But I think that there's another third aspect of blockchain that I am so passionate about, I'm such a nerd about, And I think it doesn't get a lot of love because it's not as cool as crypto. It's not as cool as the hype factor around NFT, but it's something that I think is essential and really important. And that's this idea of data notarization. So when we talk about an immutable ledger, we're talking about a permanent record of notation, right? And so just like a different way of talking about this notation is notarization. I call it data notarization. So just like with cryptography and ledgers, notarization has a history going back to like the early days of the Roman Empire, right? Like the Roman Empire got us started with ledgers, they got us started with cryptography, and they also really got us started with notaries. So this idea of notarization is really important to economic activity. It's a fraud deterrent process. A notary is basically looking at data, or in the case of issuing a document, when you take a document and you get it notarized, the notary is recording what was said, who said it, what was their motivation for saying it, when was it said, they timestamp it. And we do this notarization process for a lot of really important stuff when there's an important contract or a marriage. But the thing is that blockchain is essentially a giant notarization machine. And so it actually allows you to take any important data and notarize it in a way that's very quick and very affordable. So in the same way that blockchain has sort of put the hands of money into people or democratized the creation of money, blockchain also democratizes the ability to notarize data that's really valuable. And I think that that's going to have far-reaching economic implications.
Agreed. Amanda, Jason just mentioned a little bit about the history of notarization. And I just went to a recent recast signing for my mortgage at a bank just a couple of weeks ago. When you said back in the Roman days, it brought me back to the Roman days because you still had a notary, and I had to pull in my wife, who was doing her own thing on the other side of the island, had to have us both in front of the notary just to sign a piece of paper and have that witness. And so, yeah, wow, some things haven't really changed until blockchain.
Yeah, I mean, that's the point, is like blockchain essentially reproduces what you went through with your documents. Blockchain basically does that. I mean, you've got private keys on blockchain, which kind of match up to your identity, like your passport or your driver's license, like proving who you are. You have the hashing of the raw data, which is the document itself. And you essentially have the serialization on blockchain, which ties back to the asset, like let's say in this case, a house or an apartment or something. So you end up with this immutable record. And I think that this is going to have a far-reaching implication on the trust of communities and brands and all of that, because you're able to actually take any data that you want and imbue it with trust. And this creates a more integrous environment, because brands can now create that trusted ecosystem that, Amanda, that you were referring to. And I think that, it all comes back to, like, if you look at this trusted third party, it kind of has to do with getting rid of that.
I think you had an example about ketchup that was really interesting. It's the difference between saying my ketchup is good quality, and on March 3rd, 2021, we publicly acknowledged that our ketchup was sourced with organic tomatoes from Mexico, et cetera. It's a higher bar, as you've talked about before.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the idea of a brand is, the origin of a brand was literally like a brand on a cow, right? And the farmers would brand the cattle to say that this is a quality cow. You can trust this cow. And from that term, branding has become this way of trusting what a seller of a good says. I trust the seller of this ketchup to tell me that it's a good product. And that's all been fine and good. And that's the best that we've done for most of the 20th century. But now, as you said, like, we're getting to a point now where it's like, I can actually have the brand tell me with a notarized trail that these tomatoes were purchased on this day and time from this supplier, et cetera. And I think that data trail is going to create a better relationship between consumers and brands.
And it gets into the supply chain, which we're going to talk about in a second. But again, to push back, what if a brand is lying? How do you ensure that you don't have an immutable record of truth?
Yeah, I mean, sure. What do they say? I mean, BS in, BS out, garbage in, garbage out, right? And garbage on the blockchain is just immutable garbage. And so, that's absolutely still a problem, but we're still raising the bar, right? So a notary doesn't necessarily verify the truth of what you say when you go into a notary and you make a declaration of some kind. They're verifying a record that a thing was said. So we have an immutable record of concrete statements. That in turn raises the bar in terms of accountability. And it's not going to eliminate compliance and third-party certification, spot checks, et cetera, inspections, but it's going to make it a lot easier, and it's going to create a higher bar of accountability. I think it takes us a long way towards holding people to account for the things that they say.
Great. VeChain has a reputation in the blockchain space for doing a lot of projects around supply chain. Can you talk about that?
Yes, absolutely. So, I mean, I think that this idea of data notarization and compliance and having that record of what moves from where, that's kind of what this all comes down to. So when you've got a product like our ketchup example, you've got tomatoes that are being sourced from multiple suppliers. And so with supply chain, you can actually notarize the orders, notarize the sale of those tomatoes, and create a record of that. So you're using public ledger to actually create a more transparent way of communicating where the upstream ingredients of something are coming from, right? And then on the flip side, you can then take that information and make that visible to the consumer. So the consumer can actually look, like, are the tomatoes actually organic? So you're creating a system where on the one hand, suppliers are relying on this immutable ledger to trust each other and solve disputes. And then the consumer on the other side, the consumer is holding the brand to account by looking at the information that they're declaring about the brand. So there's a sort of supplier piece, and there's a consumer marketing piece. Alex, I mean, from your perspective at Blue Byte, I mean, you might have some thoughts on the whole consumer side of this supply chain piece and how that might be interesting to a brand.
Yeah, what you just discussed is definitely an important tenet of a lot of what consumers are looking for nowadays. They're looking to make sure that the brand that they're spending their investment on has sustainable goals. They have a stance on circularity, and to say it on social media is one thing, but to see it after you've scanned a product is another thing. Whether you want to debate if the trust is inherent that was in the product, you can debate that till the end of time. However, from an audience perspective, from a consumer perspective, there's a lot of peace of mind when you get that product in hand. You're able to scan it. You see the provenance of the entire ecosystem of how this product was made, where it was sourced, how was it manufactured. All these things are really important in during the purchase decision. And so, yeah, to your point, provenance, traceability, authenticity are very, very important tenets of what we do for the consumer experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Alex, I think that an offshoot of this that is pretty fascinating is that when brands are going to be held to that higher standard, you're going to start to see where brands are inflating their value, right? So you're going to have premium products marketing themselves as a premium product. Yeah. And when they're actually held to that standard of data notarization and supply chain transparency, you're going to quickly see, like, does this brand really deserve that or not? Because if there's a generic product that's much cheaper, that has a similar provenance in terms of the immutable ledger, then you're actually going to be able to feel as confident purchasing that lower branded product or lower priced product as you would the premium, right? So I think what's going to happen is blockchain notarization is going to erode the given around certain, luxury products. And we're seeing this with dog food, of all things. Millennials are so demanding about the ingredients in their dog foods. that a lot of pet food companies that have historically been leaders in the space are suddenly getting into a lot of trouble because consumers aren't buying their product anymore because they know it's literally dog food, literally garbage. And so, I think that that's a good example of, it's not blockchain related yet, although VeChain is working with a lot of pet food companies in the Chinese market. But I think that as consumers start to demand more transparency around not only their own food, but the food for their pets, et cetera, we're going to start to see, is the brand really deserving of that premium mark, or can I spend my money on a cheaper product? I think we're going to see prices. In some ways, this could have a positive impact on consumer good prices over the long term.
Yeah, and I think give consumers more control to demand this accountability as you're talking about. I can especially see this in the fashion industry. So we've talked about supply chain traceability and sourcing, manufacturing, but could the blockchain also track products through retail sale and beyond, including even secondary product owners?
Definitely. And I think there's, I'm sure Alex has got some thoughts on this as well, given some of the stuff that you guys have done with one of your sneaker clients. But it's I think that when you look at the, and so far what I've been trying to outline is these three big pillars of blockchain: cryptocurrencies for payment, the NFTs for ownership, and then the data notarization. I think if you think about this in terms of products, data notarization is about the creation of goods. Fungible tokens are like the payment of goods. And then NFTs, the ownership. So when you put all this stuff together, I think that there's going to be an opportunity to monetize the transfer of the NFT. So earlier when we were talking about reinventing ownership through NFT, I think it's going to be possible to look at the selling of goods on secondary markets with NFT. And because of the immutable record of the movement of that non-fungible token, you can then use a smart contract to issue a royalty back to the original owner. So because of that traceability, you actually be able to see the movement of ownership of a good from one owner to another.
And it would be an incentive to install that system if you were a supplier, because you'd be making money throughout the longevity of this product.
Definitely. Yeah, I think brands are going to be very interested not only to get a kickback or a royalty in terms of the secondary market sale of their products, but also the ability to have more visibility into who's buying it and what prices it's being sold for. I mean, for example, if you notice that you're selling a handbag for $1,000 and then on the secondary market it's going for $5,000, you may want to be able to, because you can track that information, you may want to increase the price of that in the first place.
Yeah.
Ding, ding, ding. And I'm only saying that because I'm not at liberty to talk about some of the high-end luxury brands that we're working with. But what you two just spoke of is exactly what we're doing for several of our high-end luxury brands. They see it as another robust revenue model, which I do as well. As long as those key components are there, where it's a real product, you understand the provenance of the product, where it's living, where it was born, the ownership that it's changed hands with. As long as those things are available, there is a huge market for it right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also a huge market for digital goods. I mean, imagine if you're selling a $5,000 purse. You're talking about inflation, but the inflation of a digital copy of a luxury good. So let's say you wanted to just start issuing non-fungible tokens tied to a virtual version of that handbag. You could make a lot of revenue from selling digital goods that have essentially no cost of input in terms of manufacturing besides the minting of the NFT. So there's really, I think, a lot of revenue opportunities for companies in both the authentication and ownership of the data notarization and NFTs around physical goods, but also the NFTs around virtual goods and selling those virtual goods. So I think that in the short term, we're going to see authentication sort of lead the way. And I think you're going to see data notarization be the method of recording the upstream data, the sale, and where it goes. But I think over the mid to long term, you're going to have goods that are notarized during the supply chain. They're going to be paid for with crypto, and then they're going to be tracked and owned through NFT. And I just think that that's why blockchain has so much potential to really reinvent the pillars on which our economy is built.
Okay, so we've been talking very optimistically about blockchain and its opportunities so far, but give me the Black Mirror version. Do you think that this increased transparency is going to have a dark side in terms of perhaps surveillance?
Well, I'm of the school of thought. I'm not a technological determinist. So I don't think that technologies are inherently good or bad. I think that they are tools, and those tools can be used in different ways. So I think that the way that a technology is deployed is always going to be a reflection of the values of the people that have power to wield that tool. But certainly the traceability around blockchain transactions, NFT, crypto, that's going to lead to more visibility and transparency. Now, the flip side of that is some people may consider that to be oppressive or surveillance. And so, you definitely could use blockchain to create a more controlled society. So it's a more transparent society, but it could also potentially be more controlled as well. And I think that those tensions are going to be playing out. I mean, VeChain right now has been doing a lot of work in Europe with the Republic of San Marino to support the creation of a digital vaccine passport. And, on Twitter, we're very proud of that work and proud that VeChain has been used to support keeping people healthy, right? That's a solution built with our partners at DNVGL. But there's a lot of people in the crypto space who are radical, libertarian, that are really freaked out about vaccine passports. And, it's the question kind of comes up is blockchain being used as a tool for good or not? And I think that there's no right or wrong answer. I mean, just like vaccines, I know where I stand, but there's a lot of people that have a different opinion than me on vaccines. And so you have this tool of medicine that does a certain thing, and society isn't clear about what's right and wrong. And I think that it's the same thing with blockchain. It's a transformative technology that does real stuff. And some people are going to think that stuff is good, and some people are going to think it's bad. And so it's up to society to just craft a way forward and try to find a way that's inclusive of everyone.
Yeah, exactly. I have a few more questions for you before I let you go. VeChain is kind of unique for its blockchain as a service, I suppose. Can you tell us about how this can be useful to businesses across industries?
So our position is that blockchain adoption, mass adoption of blockchain, is going to come from businesses and enterprises. So we're kind of the odd man out in the blockchain world. Again, coming back to these libertarian sort of themes, a lot of blockchain is used by the anarchist community and the privacy community and all of that. VeChain is very much focused on servicing the needs of enterprises, because we believe that if you can take care of the needs of enterprises and governments, you're going to be driving the bulk of use cases for the bulk of people. And that's going to lead to mass adoption. But in order for governments and businesses to use blockchain, it needs to be easy, it needs to be fast, it needs to be affordable, straightforward to deploy. And, you're just not going to have IT departments that are coding smart contracts and building blockchain infrastructure. And worst of all, I would say buying and holding crypto, because it's still a pretty rudimentary process. It's not, the user experience around crypto is not well developed. And so enterprises don't want to get bogged down in that. So what VeChain did was we created a blockchain as a service application that allows businesses to benefit from the three pillars of blockchain in a way that doesn't require them to install blockchain infrastructure or host nodes or buy and hold crypto. So we're sort of serving as an application layer between the enterprise and the core protocol. And through that technology layer, that application layer, we're able to drive mass adoption without a lot of the headaches that would come from trying to build a decentralized application directly on chain.
Alex, did you want to say something?
No, I just had just one sort of finishing comment. I think, Jason, you might agree with me. We talked obviously a lot about, the focus was about blockchain, but in no shape or form is this a way to say that every business application, every business process deserves a blockchain integration. It doesn't. I would even challenge that most business processes don't need a blockchain integration. So I just want to be very clear about that. There are certain things that it's fantastic for, where you do need to have a trustless environment, where you don't need people and a manual process to establish trust. It's fantastic, right? Things like that. But in many, many cases, you don't need a blockchain. And we're not talking about now, we're talking about now and upcoming futures as well. It's something that's very specific and that solves a very specific problem.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and I think that's a really good point. companies reach out to us all the time and they're like, we've got this great idea for blockchain. And I'm always pushing back because it's not always required, right? I mean, and I think to summarize how I think about that core problem that, because like you said, it's like it solves a core problem. The core problem is related to, do I have two parties that don't trust each other and need an environment that's secure, right? A trustless environment. It comes back to getting rid of that third-party intermediary. And so when you think about that in a business application context, it really comes down to, am I sharing data between stakeholders that don't necessarily see eye to eye? That's it. Essentially competitors. Like if I'm just dealing with data inside of my business and I don't have any incidents of fraud or internal data loss or something like that, probably don't need blockchain. Blockchain is really useful when you're dealing with sharing data or other activities, economic or informational activities between outside stakeholders. That's when blockchain makes the difference, because then it takes the data and removes the third-party trust. And so if you're just recording data at home, you don't need, I can trust myself. I don't need a blockchain to trust myself. It's when I'm talking to you guys that I need to have blockchain, because I don't trust you guys and I want to keep everybody honest, right? That's when the blockchain makes the difference.
Would you say that we're eroding trust from business interactions, or we're leaving no room for it?
Trust is it's a great question, a great topic. Trust is such a huge part of current economic activity, and we take it for granted because it's so embedded. I mean, when you go to the grocery store and you pick up a package of meat, you trust that that meat is fresh. And we're really lucky in the United States because, like in the US, we've got a really reliable system that, like, the economic activity in the US works pretty well, right? I mean, we are one of the most litigious societies in the world, but for the most part, we trust the products that we buy. Now, in other countries, that's not always the case. Not every country has the ability to trust the products that they buy. And I think that that's why we're seeing places like China that has a high instance of food fraud, for example. China is an early adopter of blockchain technology, in part because they have higher instances of fraud. Their society is so big, they don't necessarily have the ability to monitor and control the way that we do here, right? So blockchain is serving as a way of bringing more integrity into their supply chains. Now, to come back to this issue of trust, right? Like, there's just so much trust that we just take for granted. And I think that what blockchain is doing is it's making it more explicit, and it's removing the need for implicit trust, and it's making things more concrete. And so I think that's actually going to have the effect of reducing prices, making the environment more integrous, and just we will end up having more trust in products, more explicit trust, and less implicit or implied trust.
Right. So it's just formalizing the trust that needs to be there in the exchange anyways, and maybe leaving less room for risk.
Exactly. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. So did you want to share some quick examples of companies that are using VeChain's tools that are making what you were talking about earlier concrete in terms of blockchain as a service?
Yeah, well, for example, we work with this company called ReSea. It's a Danish company that's cleaning up rivers and oceans in Indonesia. They're basically working with local community people to harvest plastic from the water and then gathering that plastic up and getting it out of the oceans. So this is a really important environmental activity, but it's like, how can you trust that they're really doing that, right? So we're working with DNVGL, which is a third-party certification company, right? Like you were asking earlier, like, well, how do we know that the data collected on blockchain has integrity? Well, one of the ways we do that is working with companies like DNV. DNV is a world-class global provider of third-party certifications. And so they developed a standard around how to harvest ocean plastic. They're working with the ReSea project to ensure that the community people that are harvesting this plastic are adhering to the standard protocols created by DNV. And then all of that information then gets recorded and notarized with VeChain. So you're able to actually have an immutable record of all the plastic that's being harvested in accordance with standard operating procedures developed by DNV for the ReSea project. And so you have this awesome ecosystem between the certifier, the project coordinator, the community members, and VeChain all working together to create this trusted environment that the plastic is being harvested, that there's integrity in the process, and we've been able to increase trust among everyone working together, and that's making a positive benefit for the environment. So we're really proud of these efforts around the way that blockchain is being used in green efforts, including not only just circular economy, but also decarbonization is going to be a big driver of blockchain adoption as well. And then in the US with Blue Byte, actually, we've been working with a company that does celebrity merchandise, right? They work in the entertainment space, and they actually are placing NFC tags into limited edition t-shirts from rock bands and other musicians. And then they tie that NFC tag to a certificate of authenticity that's recorded on VeChain. And so when the consumer scans the tag, they'll have the certificate of authentication, but then also they'll access limited edition content that's only accessible through that experience. And I think that it's very reasonable. I mean, Alex, I don't want to jump the gun, but I think it's pretty reasonable that we'll see NFT play a role in that at some point in the future. So
you read my mind. I'm waiting for the concert from 1967 to be minted as an NFT corresponding to this band. Yeah, you read my mind.
Yeah, it's pretty exciting where things are headed. So it's like where we are today, it's still focusing a lot on that data notarization. But I think that as NFT matures and as crypto payment matures, then they'll all three start to work together.
Great. Anything else you'd like to add?
Well, I think that just to close, I've tried to make it clear that there's this sort of emerging relationship between NFT, fungible tokens or cryptocurrencies, and data notarization, right? That's been my sort of theme. And I'm really excited about that because of the way that I believe it's going to really help to reinvent the core infrastructure of paying for or selling and owning products, both digital and physical. And so I think that there's going to be such a even greater role for blockchain to play in the future than it does even today. I still think that we're in the very early days of this adoption. But I think one thing that's really interesting is the inclusion of the blockchain legislation in the latest the infrastructure bill. Alex, I mean, did you saw some of the information about that, right?
Yeah, I'm just really pleasantly surprised that we're here. I didn't think that something like that conversation would happen probably for another few years, to be quite honest. And when I did catch the banter on Twitter, I'm very hopeful because I truly believe that leaning towards legislation that opens this conversation up will truly help us get back on our feet as a country. I have very, very grand expectations from opening this conversation. I know it's just the first inning and we have lots to go at the government level, but for me, it was just a beacon of hope for me that they.
Yeah, agreed. It's like we're really, you had this $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill that was being tied up in part because of the debate over crypto legislation. And I just think that that's a sign that, we are beginning, after 10 years now, we're beginning to arrive. So finally, I guess the last thing I'd add is, that if you're a business out there listening to this podcast and you're interested in learning more, talk to Alex and I, because, we've got some really interesting things that we can do together. You want to make sure that you're Amazon and not Borders. I know it's early days with blockchain, don't get left in the dust. Like it's a technology that has a lot to offer. And if you're a company that's innovative and forward-looking, you definitely want to be thinking about what your blockchain strategy is in the years to come.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your time, Jason. I appreciate it.
Yeah, you're certainly welcome. And Alex, thanks for joining the conversation, and we'll be in touch.
Jason, Amanda, this has been really fun for me. So thank you both.
That was my conversation with Jason Rockwood, the VP and General Manager of VeChain. Also in this episode was Alex Kim, Director of Partnerships at Blue Byte. For more episodes of this podcast, subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever the best podcasts are found. The Future of Things is powered by Blue Byte. Blue Byte connects brands and consumers through products. To learn more about some of the ways Blue Byte is providing a digital touchpoint on physical products, including sneakers, handbags, artwork, and more, visit bluebyte.com. I'm your host, Amanda Costco. Until next time, here's looking towards the future.